And it's, of course, that's a beautiful song there from Lisa Edwards, and it's entitled Cry. 22 minutes past 2 this afternoon. And yes, joining me this afternoon for the afternoon groove, we have Professor Dr. Peter Baofu, and he is an American visionary and author of 143 new theories and visions in 177 scholarly books as of 2022 in the month of October, and numerous articles to provide a visionary challenge to conventional wisdom in all fields of knowledge, social science, formal science, and natural science, and also humanities, with the aim of unveiled theories of everything, together with numerous visions of future historics in relations to mind, nature, society, and culture. Good afternoon to you, Mr. Peter Baofu, and how are you this afternoon?
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very fine, and you?
I am very well, thank you. It's really good to have you on my show, and it's a privilege to have you in my show as well. So, before we go through all the things that we're going to be talking about for this afternoon, could you, talk about a little bit about yourself? Give us more details on who you are, what you do, and where you come from.
Well, you have done a wonderful job to introduce me already, so maybe I can just add a few more. As you said, I'm an American visionary and author of 177 books in all fields of knowledge: the social sciences, the formal sciences, the natural sciences, and the humanities. And I have also proposed more than 144 different new theories and visions of the human future in relation to the mind, culture, society, and nature. And I have been in more than 125 different countries around the world. And for my global tour, I do that in order to engage in an ethnographic research of humanity. It will not be focusing on one culture, one people, one ethnic group, and all that. It will be on all of them. So my vision is very global, is futuristic, and it tries to understand the future of the entire planet Earth. And so this is a good summary of who I am as a person. Then I have done many other things, but I think that's sufficient to start the conversation from there.
Very well. So, for our conversation this afternoon, we will be talking about to do with reality that is happening in Vanuatu. And lately we have just formed a government that has just came up for the past few weeks. So, the political system of Vanuatu. What do you think about the political system in Vanuatu?
Well, as an outsider, I'm not an insider, so my remark would be very neutral. I don't favor any specific group or political party. But based on my observation, I think that since 1980, for example, in the last 40 years or so, Vanuatu has undergone quite a number of different governments, and that is a sign of political instability. I'm not saying that that's good or that's bad. I think that it can go either way. It depends on how you look into the situation. But I do think that when you have two unstable political cycle, that is very difficult for a government to achieve something long term. Because if you want to do something long term, an unstable government is not very effective to implement whatever you want to do. After a few months or a few years, then you have another one, and then the new one come in, you have some other agenda, some other policy, and when you implement them, and then after a few months, a few years, and then you have to have another one again. So that is not very good in implement some of whatever the national goals of the government is. So that is a weakness in a way, but on the other hand, there's also some good thing about that, because a very stable government is not also very good, because it can be very conservative, it can be very unchanging to improve the situation, because the international environment is changing all the time. So when a government is too stable, too settled, it becomes like a frozen political entity. It's not doing much. So either way that you go, it can be good and bad, so it depends on the situation at this time.
So very interesting to see how well you know our history in Vanuatu. Because you have mentioned yesterday when we were having a little bit of chat about ourselves, getting to know you, you do have how do I say? You can see the future, or you can tell the future or how it goes and things like that. So looking at Vanuatu, what is the cultural cause or reason behind this political instability in the government?
There are a lot of different reasons. Political instability is only one problem in politics here, but you also have quite a number of some other political problems and social problems.
Right.
If you look into the corruption index, that is another major problem. But again, the word corruption is it's not a neutral term. But I prefer to use that in a neutral term, in the sense that it can go either way again.
Okay.
Corruption is not necessarily bad, but it's not necessarily good either. It depends on who you are. This is one of the major reasons, by the way, that corruption has been pervasive throughout human history. If corruption is so bad, why do you think there's so much corruption in all of human history? Even in the most advanced countries, including the US, you have a lot of corruption too. So, but on the other hand, this is not to say that corruption is good, because the fact that a lot of people have been fighting against corruption also tells you there are some groups of the population, they are not very happy about it. So it can go either way again.
Yep.
So the point of the policy maker is to make sure that he understands the costs and the benefits when you try to implement a policy. Otherwise, your vision and your policy is going to be too unrealistic.
Right.
So that's very important. Now you ask for the cultural causes about all of this. Well, there are many different things. One of them is, of course, there is no a unified ethnic or racial group in Vanuatu. That's why you have political instability, because you have too many different groups. Now that is not necessarily bad and good either, because in different countries, for example, sometimes you have different groups. That's good for diversity. So diversity can be a good thing. But on the other hand, when you have diversity which doesn't work out, it creates a lot of social conflicts. It creates a lot of political instability. And you have no unified government, and when you have one, it doesn't last for a long time. So this cycle continues. So this is one of the major reasons, the cultural one over here, with the social structural effect. But you also have another one, which is the political culture of clientism, which is, what I mean by that is there is a cultural tradition which tend to favor certain group based on the group that you are from. So if you are in power, the chance is that you, whoever you are, tend to favor the group that you belong to. And you try to finance, come up with some funds, whatever allocation of resources, which will benefit your group. Now, at the expense of other groups, which you do not focus on, then of course someone else who is on the other side will do the same thing for his or her own group. So this is the conflicting struggle among different groups, and this kind of political culture is not a very cohesive. It encourages polarization into different groups. So that is one of the major reasons for the political instability. You don't have a kind of political homogeneity such that the government is unified around certain things. For example, by contrast, the Chinese government is much more homogeneous by comparison with the different political culture. So again, there's good and bad too. You can go either way. But I'm just comparing the two and just give you some example that it's not necessarily bad and good, but there are some cultural reasons for that. And yeah, so this is just two good examples about the problem facing Vanuatu.
Right, okay. Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Peter Baofu, for these little bit of information that you have given us. We've got more questions coming up for you, but we got to listen to quite a few musics before we head along with more music. More interviews or more questions that is listed out for us to be talking about for this afternoon. So stay tuned always on Buzz 96.3 FM. This is Jet on the Afternoon Groove, and enjoy more songs that are coming up for you after this short commercial break.
The Afternoon Groove on Buzz 96.
Yes, and that was a beautiful song there from Tom Petty, King's Highway. Hope you enjoyed that song there for you. It's Jet on the Afternoon Groove on Buzz 96.3 FM, 22 minutes to 3 this afternoon. And yes, still with me this afternoon is Professor Dr. Peter Baofu, and he is an American visionary that has written 177 books and has been to a lot of countries, and I should say he has been through 120 countries all over the world, looking at different issues that are affecting the world globally. And this afternoon he is with me, and we are talking about some issues that are affecting Vanuatu, and he is one of a kind of person that can give a solution on what our problems are in different parts of the world, different countries, and also different global problems that we have in individual worlds in the world. So good afternoon to you again, Professor, and how are you this afternoon?
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me.
Well, we are back in the studio again, just to continue our conversation that we had earlier about the political stability in Vanuatu, and also how it affects or how it is related to our cultural issues in Vanuatu as well. And you gave us some little bit of reasons on what is the cultural reasons behind these political issues that we are facing in Vanuatu. So apart from these reasons behind the cultural and political issues in Vanuatu, what do we see the links that is like colonial links between Vanuatu and in other countries, in Vanuatu global as a whole?
This is also a very important question, because that is the external factor versus the internal factor. So far we have spoken about the internal factor, so we can also talk about the external factor now, which is also very important. So for any solution, you also need to look into the external factor. The external factor right now facing Vanuatu is that, as you know, I don't need to repeat that, and Vanuatu has a colonial history. Let's say the Western colonial legacy.
Yes.
You can talk about different Western powers, French, English, Spanish, Portuguese, and all that. And over the centuries, they have been trying to go through different kind of interventions. That has made Vanuatu a colonial status, which has affected, I think, more negatively than positively the economic and the political and the social and the cultural development of this country. Right. And now, as you know too, Vanuatu is also more dependent on Australia and New Zealand. That's another major the regional powers.
Also China.
China is coming up. We can talk about the external link. This is some of the that is in terms of long-term development of this country. You may have liberated yourself politically from a colonial status to a decolonial status, but you have not yet successfully eliminated or liberated yourself from the colonial legacy, which can be political, social, cultural, economic, and all that. Right. So you are still under a lot of control by external actors. I don't need to go into any specific or pinpoint any specific person or powers, but I think you know whom I'm talking about. I have spoken to some local people, and some of them have told me too many examples that they cannot do this, they cannot do that, unless they are given approval by outside powers in terms of banking, in terms of finance, in terms of political intervention, in terms of military bases, or whatever else that you have. That is a long list, and I think that this is a very serious problem in the longer term. And I think that if Vanuatu really cares about the long-term future, the politicians have to focus on this issue. which I think has not been adequately considered because of the problems, the political instability, which have hurt Vanuatu to implement some long-term plan. And many of the groups and the political leaders are too focused with their own personal or internal factors that that is a lacking political condition and solution. And I think that, but that is not necessarily a bad thing again, because I think that can be the driving point to unify Vanuatu in the longer term, and I do encourage that. And I think that maybe now we have to talk about the solution, but before we talk about the solution, the other question that you asked is there is another major factor that is probably more serious than anything else that Vanuatu has ever encountered. That is the rising rivalry between the U.S. and China in the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah.
And I have predicted some years ago, I wrote an article about that. I predicted the second Cold War emerging between China and the U.S. At the time, no one paid attention to me because at that time there was no Cold War yet. It turns out that that's exactly what's happening. So my prediction turned out to be correct. In fact, I have made many other predictions in my publications already. Many of them also turned out to be quite correct. So this is a major issue that Vanuatu and many other Pacific Islanders have to seriously consider, because now many of these countries, the islands, have been under tremendous pressure from some major powers not to trade or not to have too much connection with China, because now that's exactly what the Cold War is supposed to be.
Right.
In the older days, I'm talking about the first Cold War, you have the Soviet Union and the US, and each superpower will ask other country that don't side with them, side with us. Right. They are the bad guy, we are the good guy. I mean, this kind of rhetoric. So they are doing the same thing to you again. And now it's not between the Soviet Union and the US, not between the US and China. So I can imagine that each side is going to tell you, we are the good guy, they are the evil guy, they are the bad guy, so don't go to them, go to us, we are the, I mean, you know what I'm talking about. Exactly. So that is the rhetoric which is very common. And that is a problem, but that's not necessarily a bad thing again, because given the history of non-aligned movement, and Vanuatu, by the way, has a long history for that, especially after the colonial legacy. Vanuatu has tried to maintain a non-aligned status in international relations, and also has supported other movements which have been fighting for liberation or independence, like the example with the western part of Papua, for example. So yes, I think that is not necessarily inconsistent with the political status of Vanuatu in foreign policy, but I think that can be a crisis, but also an opportunity for Vanuatu to change. Again, this can be a driving point to unify Vanuatu among the local politicians. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, because if you can manage the crisis correctly, I think that can be a great opportunity for Vanuatu to be free from them and to be much more prosperous and powerful. And how do you do it? Well, then maybe the next conversation then we shall have.
Yes. So you were talking about all this, colonial linking to Vanuatu with the British, French, and now it's going to be the US and China. The Cold War coming up, you've predicted for a few years ago, but unfortunately nobody, taken into consideration that it is going to come true. But with all this, problems and struggles and difficulties in the countries, what is the solution that you can propose to us so that we will think in a long term that if we want our country to go this way, we have to think of a solution to do like this. So what are the solutions that you can give us this very afternoon?
I think the solution there are four major considerations: short-term, long-term, domestic, and international. So you have to consider all of them. Otherwise, it would not be very complete. I'm not sure we have time to talk about all of them, but I have written many books about all of this anyway. So let me give you some examples about each of the four. Let me talk about the domestic first, and then the international, and then the short term and the long term. The domestic, I think that one of, as I mentioned before, one of the political problems in Vanuatu that I have observed is political instability, the cycle. The turnover of governments is too often. You need certain political stability to develop. If you ask me why Vanuatu is poor, I can tell you now, one of the major reasons is because the government is too unstable. You need to have a long-term stable government. Look at China is a good example. China has been able since the 1980s and 1970s to transform itself to become the global economic superpower, surpassing the US in terms of GNP, purchasing power parity. So why? Because they have a very stable political government. You don't have a turnover of the presidency or the prime minister or something like that once every 1 year or 2 years or 3 months or
Actually,
whatever.
it was supposed to be 4 years.
But so they have been so stable that they are able to focus their time and their energy to transform the whole society. And also the Chinese population are much more homogeneous, and they are much more collectivist too. They work together with the government. It's not like the US, which is very individualistic. The political culture there is much more collectivist. So the people and the government, they work together. They think about the common good. They work together. This is exactly what is lacking in Vanuatu. You don't have that kind of political unity. You don't have that kind of homogeneous political culture. So I'm just giving you one example, not because I want you to be like China, but because I want to give an example of what you are lacking. Now, how can you implement one for Vanuatu? I think that is a question that the local people have to decide, not me. I can only give you a vision, but how you want to implement that in terms of specific steps and shapes and size and all that, I think that each country has its own peculiar features and attributes. So they have to consider how to fit that into whatever the political culture and political system is. So this, I think, is a very important thing that the local people need to have. I do think that one of the political solutions is that Vanuatu also lacks a political ideology which can unify the country. So the political instability in the political structure also has a reflection in the political culture, which is the lack of a political ideology which can unify all of them. That's why you have put so many turnover. You have so many different groups. Each group care only about itself and try to get some money, funding, whatever. Vote for me, and my group is going to support your group, and the other group will ask the same thing to their own group. So over time, you have this kind of very small parties, and each of them trying to compete, collide, and align whatever they can do, form a government, this and that. That is more or less like a parliamentary political system like the one that you see in the UK, for example. But unfortunately, the history of the political system in the UK is a mess. So I'm not going to go further into that. Look about how many governments do they have in the last few years and what they have done in terms of the political and economic development. So in the case of Vanuatu, I think that this is something that you need to have. Now, how do you have it? What do you need to have? Then we have to go now to the external one. The external condition, I think, can be a good opportunity for Vanuatu, because I think that the other leg of the solution is to take the opportunity of the new Cold War. Don't think that there's a bad thing for you. Try to do, in a way, your neighbor, Solomon Islands, is already doing that. Solomon Islands have a security pact with Australia, has been in good term with the US too, but Solomon Islands has also signed a security pact with China now. Why did they do that? Why? because they want to balance each other out. They do not want to be dominated by any of them. So when you are small and weak, for example, you cannot fight the major powers. You don't have the power to fight them, but they have the power to invade you, to bomb the hell out of you, to assassinate you, to change the government, to influence your position. They can do whatever they like. If they want to, there's not much that you can do. But there are certain other things that you can do, which is try to balance them out.
Right.
So, if you allow one major power block to come in and say, join us, do not join them, we are the good guy, they are the bad guy, then you will be dominated by them. You will be bullied by them, because now you are under the protection, there's no other choice for you. And you become a vassal, for example. So the best way to balance out is that invite them, but also invite the other group too. Never invite one. If there are two of them fighting with each other and come to you, you invite both of them. And they are opposite of each other. So if someone give you some problem, you can go to the other one and help. And the other one try to dominate you, you go to the other one and ask them for help. So you balance each other out. So that's exactly what Solomon Islands is, because Solomon Islands have been dominated by Australia and some other Western powers, and they want to now to liberate themselves from that dependency. So now they have the opportunity for China to come in so they can balance out. In fact, I'm not sure if you remember Nelson Mandela in South Africa. Before he died, he once gave a speech about South Africa. He said, we, the blacks in South Africa, we have this problem here. We cannot do anything without outside powers telling us, you should do this, you cannot do this, you should do that, and you cannot do this. And Nelson Mandela asked, but why do they think that we have to listen to them and always have to ask for their approval? Can we just do what we want to do? Can we trade with any country? And if we want to trade with this country and some other powers will say, no, you should not trade with them. You should trade with us only, not with them. But why should we trade with other people? Can we trade with everyone? Can we trade whatever we like to trade to benefit us? We are not hurting anyone. We just want to be friends to everyone. So he said that we black people need to stand up. Now that is his vision. Whether they will succeed in doing that, I do not know, but I'm just giving an analogy over here. I think that the external factor is that Vanuatu need to look into not being dependent on any major country or power, whether they are Australia or New Zealand or France or the UK or the US or China or whoever else, Japan or Russia, whatever. I think that it's much better for you to open to all of them. Do not listen to any of them, but maximize your benefits. Be nice to all of them. Do business with all of them, but do not attack any of them. Be nice to all of them, because if you attack any of them, they can attack you. You cannot fight them. But if you are nice to each other, if something happens to you, you always have some friends outside to help you.
Right.
You understand me?
Yes.
You balance out. Okay? They are not there for you. They are not there for their own conquest and their own interest. Okay? Why are you so poor in all these years? If all those powers are so nice to you, how come you are not so rich now? And you have been working so hard, you said. Yeah. But so you have to think realistically. They are not there for you. So you have to learn how to benefit yourself, but also be nice to all of them. So that you can. So that is an opportunity for you, not a risk. In fact, this is exactly what is happening now. Australia, for example, New Zealand now, and the US now, all of a sudden are sending more money in now to the Pacific Islands because they want to persuade them from joining China. And China now is also sending more money in too. So in a way, you are really doing a nice job now. You make yourself to be the beautiful lady that they all of them want you. You understand what I'm saying?
The lady in red.
Yeah. So all of them come to you and court you and say, okay, I'll give you this. Can you marry me? But my point is that try to be nice to all of them, be friend to all of them, take what you have, but in the end, do not commit to any of them, because none of them is going to be interested in helping you. All of them want to come in and You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
So there is the external factor. I think that's a good opportunity. The second Cold War is not necessarily bad for you. In fact, it gives you a lot of new opportunities to balance them out that you did not have before. So now we talk about, now I have spoken domestic and international. Let's talk about short term and long term. Short term, yes, there's something that you can do short term. I do think that Vanuatu have the opportunity now to work out a national unified ideology and strategy to unify the government such that the government can work together for the common good instead of only for your own group. Because if you continue to behave like that, the political system will always be divided. And when you are divided like this, you cannot do much of anything to develop. You are always weak. And according to a different calculation, you are always so corrupt. When you boil down to each group like this, each group is competing with the other group only for themselves, and no one cares about the common good. You become a very corrupt political system. And that is not happening to Vanuatu because you lack a national ideology. You lack a national unity to unify them such that all of you say, we work together as a people, not me versus you, not my group versus your group, not my party versus your party. We, the people in Vanuatu, now we are unified by this vision. But what is the vision? That is lacking now. That's lacking. Politicians have been so busy fighting for their own survival and power. No one cares about this. They can talk about the future, but no one will do anything. Everything is now corrupt in that sense. So you need to get out of that mindset and have this kind of unified ideology. And I think that one is available now because of the changing of the political situation. In fact, something is happening in Vanuatu now. There are some improvement already. Transparency, for example, mass media, citizenship, people become more and more aware that they need to participate, they need to pay attention to this. But there's a limit because the economy of Vanuatu is still very much agricultural. And many people do not have this kind of education and experience, which is required for a very active democratic governance. So that is, now before I go into the long term, I should give you a chance to say something, otherwise...
Yes, well, unfortunately, it's 3 o'clock, so we'll be listening with the news with Adel Willie. But stay tuned always on Buzz 96.3 FM. We are coming back shortly after the news, and we will talk about the long term. Is it the long term or the short?
Yes.
The long term. So stay tuned always on Buzz. We're still with Dr. Peter Baofu, and yes, we'll be back with more good stuff that we're going to be talking about for this afternoon, and also giving you a very small education on what it's like to be at Vanuatu. Anyways, more good music coming up for you after this short commercial break. Yes, so that was a beautiful song there from Status Quo, Can the Can. I hope you enjoyed that song there for you. 13 minutes past 3 this afternoon, and yes, you're with your host Jade for this afternoon groove on Buzz 96.3 FM. Still with me this afternoon is the professor and also the Dr. Peter Baofu, and he is an American visionary that has written over 143 new series and also 177 scholarly books or books that have been written since the October 2022, and several articles that he's written again in terms of social science, formal science, and also natural science and also humanities. So he is with me this afternoon. We've been talking about a little bit of the political side of Vanuatu. How can we find a solution on how we are finding difficulties in our political instability in the country. So we've been talking about the we were talking about the how should I put it, the different solutions that we've had, but now we're going to be talking about the long term. What are the long term solutions that we should be having to make Vanuatu a better country for new Vanuatus?
Well, the long-term solution is just like the word long-term. It's not for now. It's not for the next 5 weeks or 5 months or 5 years. long term means it takes several decades or even centuries, but you need to have a long term vision. And that's why I'm a visionary, because I always think about the long term, not just about the short term. Now, in case of Vanuatu, given what I just said about the domestic solution, the international solution, and the short-term solution. Now let's talk about the long-term solution. The long-term solution is to more or less doing what I have said so far, but look a bit further down the road, not just that in the next 5 years or 5 months or something like that. I think that Vanuatu has to confront two major factors. One is what is needed is a national unity in Vanuatu, a national ideology, a kind of national political culture which can unify the country. Right now you don't have it. People talk about it, politicians talk about it, but it's just for their own political gain. What they are doing is not for the country, for themselves, for their own group. So in a way, the political instability is a reflection of the corruption inside the system. And that corruption has to be eliminated, even though corruption, as I said before, is not necessarily bad, on the other hand, because it can benefit certain groups too. But I'm saying that if you can do it in the right way, the benefit will be much more than the cost. One way that I'm thinking is that in the case of Vanuatu, you need to focus on a political culture, a political ideology, which I think is now available. You can create a new political ideology such that you will say something like this, that you will unify the country such that you are not dependent on any major country outside. Right now, economically, in many ways, Australia is still dependent on Australia and New Zealand, for example, and also former colonial powers like the UK and France, and now also the US. But now you have the opportunity. Now you have China coming in. I think that is a good thing in the sense that now you have you are now have that availability of a political ideology which is to unify the country and say we are free in the sense that we are no longer dependent on anyone, and we do not want to depend on anyone and control and dominated by anyone. Now that ideology in a way is not new, because Vanuatu also has a long history on non-alignment in foreign affairs. So it's not like inconsistent with what you had before, but you need to fine-tune that message in face of the new situation, which is changing internationally. So you need to talk about, let's say, the Cold War now, the Second Cold War, and also the rivalries between the major powers, and also the former major powers which have controlled you and dominated you. You need to do something to get out of that dependency. So now, to work on that, you have to unify your own people. Because if you are divided, how can you unify? Because outside powers, they will take advantage of you if you are divided. If your people are not divided, they will come in and they will support the opposition to oppose any government which try to do otherwise. Conversely, if the government try to do something and the opposition does not accept, and they will support the government. So they can play with you in different way. So you need to unify in the sense that there is a national ideology and political culture which say we, the people in Vanuatu, we can do something to get rid of that dependency by being open to all, but not subject to any alignment and any subjugation and domination. And that had been said many times before, in words only, but not in achievement. Economically, by the way, now you are still dependent on this power that I just mentioned. So this is a good opportunity for you, but that's long term again. I don't expect that you are going to achieve any of this in the next 5 years or 10 years. That's long term. but also long term that you also have to understand the international development. And I have proposed more than 145 different new visions and theories about the human future. Two of them, for example, is about post-democracy and post-capitalism, in which I argue that capitalism, as we understand that as an economic system, will not last anymore. It will be replaced by a new economic system, which I call post-capitalism, which can provide a better benefit to the economic environment of the human future. The same about democracy. Contrary to what you think, democracy will not last as a political system because it has become too dysfunctional. Democracy becoming more and more undesirable in the new economic and political and social situation that we are facing on Earth. And I propose that there would be a new political system I call the post-democracy. So this gives you some long-term solution that these two systems that I just proposed can also help Vanuatu to achieve the national agenda that I just mentioned. So that is a comprehensive understanding about the long term, not just domestic but also international, not just short term but also long term. Now that's easy to say, but it's not easy to do. My final words to elaborate further than that is to tell you, for example, that look at the thing that you are doing now. You are speaking English to me.
Yes, I
How
am
come
speaking
you
English.
how come you are not speaking your own language? Now many of the people on Sunday they go to church.
Yes.
That's Christian religion. How come you don't have your own religion? And Jesus Christ is a white man. How come your God is a white man, not your own man, for example? Now, how come you send so many laborers to Australia or New Zealand, wherever, to work on the farmland? How come you don't have the economy to support your own people over here? And many of them go there and come back here year in, year out. You are still poor. And your country, your economy is still 90%, 95, 96, whatever percent working in agriculture. How come you cannot progress further than that? How many years do you want to continue like this? By the way, you depend on tourism, that is fine. How many years can you continue to depend on that, given the fact that you have been so poor and you continue to be so poor by comparison with other countries? I just give you some example, for example, and the political instability. How many more years do you want to wait until something fundamentally will be changed? Forget about the politicians. They run for office. That's called liberal democracy. They are supposed to go there and say whatever you like to hear. At the end of the day, I tell you now, nothing is going to be done on any of this. So there must be a major action for someone in Vanuatu. I'm sure that some of these people will come up, some great historical shaker from Vanuatu. Some of them will come and say, it's time for us to unify, it's time for us to have a new national vision to do all of this, to transform Vanuatu in a different place on earth, which has never been imagined before. Can you do that? Well, that's my challenge to you. And I want to see how you are going to achieve that in the next 500 years or 500 or 50 years or whatever that might be.
Right.
That's my last word to you.
Yes. Apart from all the things that we have mentioned, we've been talking about the long term previously on when you mentioned, looking at the problems that are with the long term. How do you see Vanuatu in the future to giving us a better Vanuatu within the long term situations that we're having right now?
If you continue to do what you have been doing, and I can tell you now, Vanuatu will continue to be what you have now. But if you are trying to do something that I have proposed, short-term, long-term, domestic, international, the four solutions that I offer you, or the four major factors, then I think that you will be able to get rid of many of the problems that you are facing, like political instability, poverty, and dependency internationally. I think that is what I'm saying is in many ways quite compatible with the dreams and visions that you have too, given the history that you have. But that vision is just a vision. You need to work hard to implement that. So I hope that all this will happen. But if you ask me realistically, I think that not much. If you continue to get stuck in what you have been doing, then I don't think that much is going to be changed. If you continue to do what you are doing, even 50 years from now, Vanuatu will still be one of the places which do not matter too much on Earth, unfortunately. But you need to face the reality first before you change, and then you see the vision, and then you implement that.
Before I've got probably just a few more questions just to talk about more on what you are for your global trip. But coming up after this short commercial break, we're going to listen to a few musics before we talk about your global trip that you are in right now, and then returning back to which country are you going next from here. So station always on Buzz 96.3 FM. Still with me is Dr. or Professor Dr. Peter Baofu, and we'll be back shortly after this short commercial break, learning on what countries Mr. Baofu is going next, and how long is he going to be traveling for the next few years and times. Anyways, more good music coming up for you only on Buzz. Yes, and that's a beautiful song there from Sophie B. Hawkins, As I Lay Me Down. Hope you enjoyed that song there for you. 27 minutes to 4 this afternoon. And yes, you're with yours, Jade, for this afternoon groove on Buzz 96.3 FM. Now, still with me this afternoon is Dr. or Professor Dr. Peter Baofu. And yes, I've mentioned him earlier on the show. He's an American visionary that has written about probably around 177 books. And he's been in a lot of countries, should I say 123 countries that I've been through, and known about 10 different languages in his field work. Now he's been through a lot of countries and looking at the global situations, or should I say global experiences that he's experienced around the world. So before leaving me for the studio this afternoon, with your global trip that you are doing, before coming to Vanuatu, what country did you go through before coming to Vanuatu?
Well, this is a global tour that I have been doing the last few years. The reason I do that is because when I was in school, many of my professors in the US and also in Western Europe, they did a lot of research by reading books in the library, or interviewing some people in the US. And when I spoke to them, sometimes I have the impression that they were not in touch with reality, in the sense that they do not quite understand other cultures and other people. I think this is one of the major problems that people have been talking about or have been complaining about American academics or political leaders. They seem not to understand a lot or understand very well other country. So when I finished my education, I told myself that I'm not going to repeat that. That I'm not going to do what they did. I'm going to do something new altogether, and I'm going to go around the world, not just one country, one culture. I'm going to go to almost all of them, and I have been in more than 120 or 25 different countries now, so there's not much, not too many countries for me to go. And the reason I do that is because I want to understand humanity on the ground. And as a visionary, as a scholar of humanity, not just one country, one group, one culture, I have to understand all of them, the totality of the future planet Earth, not just based on one person or one culture and one society. So that's exactly what I have done, and I am very glad that I have done that, because it just opened my eyes for the first time in my life, that I have seen so many things that my previous education, my previous life upbringing, my previous social acculturation had never taught me about any of this. I have been brainwashed, so to speak, in all these years, and I just wake up to this reality, and I'm so glad that I spent so many years and all that, and that's why I become so prolific, so unusual in many of my ideas. because I have been just around the world, literally.
Mm.
So that is one of the major reasons of what I'm doing now. You asked me which countries left am I going to do? Well,
Yep.
I'm near the end of my global tour,
Ooh.
so there's not much time for me to finish, and also not many countries for me to go to. So I shall continue to visit some of the countries in the Pacific Islands.
Yep.
But then after that, I think that's more or less the end of my global tour, because I have been all regions of the world, all continents of the world.
Yep.
So I'm not missing anything. So that would be something else that I shall do afterward. And so that's my answer to your long question.
Well, thank you very much, Professor, and also Dr. Peter Baofu, for taking the time to come to the studio and letting me know what you do and what you have done, in a long-term run for your global trip. Thank you very much. It's my privilege to have known you, and it's been very interesting how our talks have been, and how your ideas, how you predict your visions, your visionary in different globally, politically wise, social wise, or anything wise that you have mentioned to me for this very afternoon. I am so pleased to have met you. Thanks a lot for coming in. Hopefully, if you do come again, I'll be here in the studio, and anytime you want to come and have a pop along and say, "Hi Jade, I'm here," you are very most welcome to come back to the studio, and we'll have another segment on what other things that we can talk about for the future. So thank you very much. I am very, very pleased to have you in the studio.
And thank you, Jay, for inviting me.
You're very welcome. Well, so with that said, we got really good music coming up your way, and this next one coming up for you from Michael Jackson, Black or White. Ooh, that is a very, very nice song coming up for you. Hope you're going to enjoy it after this short commercial.